Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plutnik, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. Well, today was um, a day that I guess had been people had been anticipating for a little while. Benjamin Netanyahu met with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House for the fourth time since Trump's return to Washington. And this was purported to be the most momentous. Um, this is where Trump was going to publicly unveil his 20-point uh, peace plan that was supposed to end the Gaza genocide, lead to an Israeli withdrawal, and ostensibly rebuild Gaza for the people of Gaza. That's how it was being sold. That's what was supposed to be presented. In fact, it's not at all what was presented. Um, the plan itself is not a promising one. It really doesn't have very many new ideas. The ones that it has don't seem very practical, such as this sort of Gaza governance board that's going to be headed by Donald Trump, and the deep involvement of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, somebody who, despite the nonsensical praise that that has been heaped upon him today by leaders of the Arab world, leaders of Arab states, is widely viewed in the Middle East, and I would say correctly, as a war criminal for his role in the unprovoked invasion of Iraq more than 2 decades ago. Aside from that, there's really not a lot that's new here. It's mostly repackaged stuff that is being put together with an eye towards, yes, backing away, at least in Trump's outline, backing away from trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza um, of all Palestinians. Although, as I will explain as we get further into this, there really aren't a lot of safeguards around that, and Benjamin Netanyahu may have his own ideas on that subject. But otherwise, most of this we've heard before, and I'm going to go through it. But before I do, I just want to sort of broadly talk about some of the things that have been said. In presenting this, Trump, um, in his press conference, said that once the deal's agreed to, and this is a quote, he said, quote, no more shooting, hopefully, as progress is made toward achieving these goals. Important to point out, and I'll get back to this later as well, but it's important to point out that is not something that Benjamin Netanyahu said in his remarks. And a lot of what Netanyahu had to say sounded like he was implying that not entirely on board with this idea of no more shooting. Um, it's very much unclear how that is exactly going to stop, given that, at least at the beginning of this process, the Israeli army is very much going to continue to be present everywhere in Gaza, and will still, if nothing else, be an occupying force that will be targeted by Hamas and other resistance forces. So, I'm not sure exactly how that's supposed to come about. And indeed, it doesn't seem like Trump is very sure either, because he also said that Arab and Muslim nations need to be allowed the chance to fulfill these commitments of dealing with Hamas. They have to deal with them because they were the one group that we have not dealt with, they being Hamas in this sentence. I haven't dealt with them, with Hamas. But the Arab countries are going to, and Muslim countries are going to be dealing with Hamas. And I believe they've already been there. I think they probably, and this is the really scary part, I think they probably have an understanding. They haven't maybe mentioned that, but I would imagine they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone as far as they've gone. So Trump hasn't even heard from his Arab interlocutors about anything they've potentially discussed with Hamas, or even if they've had a single conversation with Hamas about any of this. Now, Hamas, until today, and I am recording this the night just a few hours really after Trump and Netanyahu's joint press conference. Um, you know, the word is that just today, Hamas has finally actually received the 20-point proposal that Trump has put out there. And we're going to get to they have not, as of this recording, formally responded yet, but we'll get to what might be their response and what hints we have about that in a bit. But Trump isn't even paying any attention to that. Now, how exactly does he intend to implement any of this without even knowing whether Hamas has even been spoken to, even threatened, anything? I mean, there's absolutely nothing there. Trump's entire outline uh, is filled with vague, unspecified timelines, unspecified conditions. It's just um, very bare bones, and missing a lot of details. And yet, he claims that it's going to be enacted within 72 hours. At least that it's going to be started on within 72 hours. And that's his deadline for Hamas responding to it. Netanyahu um, has a different sort of tone in his remarks. So Netanyahu said, everybody asked, what is your plan for the day after Hamas? So here's our plan. Pass it in the cabinet. All our hostages, both those who are alive and those who died, all of them, will return home immediately. Hamas will be disarmed. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. That's not what Trump said. Trump said that Israel was going to gradually hand over those responsibilities to an international Arab and Muslim force. That supposedly Trump has convinced his Arab partners to contribute soldiers to. And then Netanyahu continues, and lastly, Gaza will have a peaceful civilian administration that is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. Again, that departs from Trump. Trump's plan does envision, not immediately, but does eventually envision involvement with the Palestinian Authority. Netanyahu does not mention anything about stopping the shooting or the bombing or any of the violence. In fact, he later posted a video to X where he said that the plan means that Israel would remain in his words, most of Gaza. That doesn't sound like the same idea that Trump has. So this isn't entirely surprising, right? Trump is talking about trying to sell Middle East peace. This is really it's grotesque, really, to say it. But the truth is, this is a vanity project for Trump. This is about him getting a Nobel Peace Prize. He doesn't give a damn about the Palestinians. Doesn't give a damn even about the Israeli hostages. Um, this is about this ridiculous pursuit of a Nobel Peace Prize. Somehow he has staked much of his ego on this idea. And so he's throwing this out there to be able more to say he brought peace to the Middle East than to actually bring peace to the Middle East. Obviously, in the conditions that have been prevalent in Gaza for the past 2 years, almost 2 years now, he could not make the case that he had brought peace to the Middle East, that he had brought peace to Israel and Palestine. But that's really what he's interested in. This plan doesn't say how that's actually going to be achieved. And we're going to get to the specifics of the plan. I'm going to run through it for you in just a little bit. But let's also look at some of the responses, because there is this time more pressure, I think, than ever on Hamas to accept what is likely to be an unacceptable offer to them. So their spokesperson, who is not a political appointee, and so this is not an official reaction, And it may be very different. We've seen this from Hamas before, especially these days, where, obviously communications between different parts of Hamas are much more difficult. You have new people involved, and just, sort of lines of communication have obviously been disrupted. So even before that, we saw sometimes that one hand didn't necessarily know what the other hand was doing or saying. That happened, fairly regularly. So this is not an official position, and I really want to stress that because Hamas's official position may be very, very different from this. But uh, their spokesperson, the director of the Hamas Gaza government media office, Ismail Al-Thawabta, excuse me, said that the plan does not represent a real, objective, or fair solution. Rather, it is an attempt to impose a new guardianship that legitimizes the Israeli occupation and strips our Palestinian people of their national, political, and human rights. Any proposals that ignore these rights and treat Gaza as a demilitarized security entity under international administration are categorically rejected by the Palestinian national collective consciousness. So again, that's not an official reaction, but it's consistent with what we know about not only Hamas's position, but the position of many Palestinians. Now, this isn't stuff that can be put to a vote. It's hard to say, how many of the starving, desperate people in Gaza who are watching their children waste away to literal bones agree with that stance at this point, or how many of them are willing to pay an unjust price just for this genocide to end. That's always been an issue. But this certainly does sound like it's pretty likely to be the response of Hamas and the other involved factions in Gaza. But we don't know that. It is possible that it won't be because, again, Hamas is facing more pressure this time, not only because of the desperation in Gaza, which is certainly real and very, very severe, but also because this plan is getting a lot of international backing, particularly in the Arab and Muslim world, and in even the international humanitarian community has had to, or at least feels it has had to, say some positive things. The head of the UN's humanitarian department, OCHA, Tom Fletcher, he said, President Trump's plan opens new possibilities for humanitarians to deliver life-saving aid at the scale desperately needed by civilians and hostages finally coming home. We are ready and eager to work in a practical and principled way to seize this moment for peace. Now, he's conditioning his fairly tepid praise here on practicality and principle, and that's important, and it is important that he said that, but at the same time, he, as a humanitarian, who's right now his priority is simply to stop the massive death and suffering and starvation that is happening in Gaza. He is looking at it as, I want to find a way to do those things, to be able to provide aid, to be able to provide medical care, to be able to help the people who are dying, who are starving, the men, the women, the babies, in droves that are starving to death, that are dying under the rubble, that are being bombed, that are being shot. Now, that's fair, I guess, but at the same time, this plan, quite frankly, isn't promising in that regard. It says, and again, we're going to get to it, but it says that as one of its planks that, humanitarian aid will flow freely. Well, humanitarian aid right now can't flow freely, even if Israel stops interfering. Yes, it can get in. Yes, they can move trucks, but there's no roads. First the roads even have to be cleared, and within that you still have these groups of, forget about the Hamas and these groups. There are other groups that have formed independently just to sort of survive. That are essentially gangs, and more to the point, there are groups that have been put together by Israel as sort of mercenaries who undermine Hamas and who have certainly been responsible, as we know, for a good deal of the looting that's happened in Gaza. So it's not it's not so simple. You can't just snap your fingers and say, okay, it's all over, and bang, the trucks can come in and the food can be distributed. It's not like that. On top of the fact that, the one organization that really, has at least some capability to really reach people all over Gaza is UNRWA. And that is not an agency that the US and Israel are going to allow to resume its operations. Even though the Trump plan says they will allow UN agencies, but that's not going to be one of them. We can certainly count on that. Um, the pressure on Hamas to accept anyway, though, comes from the fact that so much of the Arab and Muslim world seems to be behind this. So there was a joint statement from the foreign ministers of Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Now, in terms of the Arab, certainly the Arab and Muslim world, those are some heavy hitters. Those are some important states. Whatever else one may think of them and whatever else one may think of the regimes that run them, um, and their leaders, they are important, and they're important to Hamas. And when they are coming together and making a statement, it matters. So their statement in part read that they welcome the announcement by President Trump regarding his proposal to end the war, rebuild Gaza, prevent the displacement of the Palestinian people, and advance a comprehensive peace, as well as his announcement that he will not allow the annexation of the West Bank. I recommend going back to my last video where I talked about what nonsense this is around this whole issue of annexation, but how it is nonetheless, it's a red line for these countries, even though the formal annexation really doesn't make much of a difference. Uh, the letter goes on to say that the ministers affirm that their readiness to engage positively and constructively with the United States and the parties toward finalizing the agreement and ensuring its implementation in a manner that ensures peace, security, and stability for the peoples of the region. They reaffirmed their joint commitment to work with the United States to end the war in Gaza through a comprehensive deal that ensures unrestricted delivery of sufficient humanitarian aid to Gaza, no displacement of the Palestinians, the release of hostages, a security mechanism that guarantees the security of all sides, full Israeli withdrawal that rebuilds Gaza and creates a path for a just peace on the basis of the two-state solution under which Gaza is fully integrated with the West Bank in a Palestinian state in accordance with international law as key to achieving regional stability and security. Now, in the past, um, such statements from so many Arab and Muslim countries almost always included some mention of Jerusalem and some mention of Palestinian refugees. That's obviously, as you note, that's out the window here, which is, sort of par for the course for where these states are these days. But and it is dubious that the description that this statement makes, or character the way it characterizes Trump's peace deal would lead to the conditions that they're talking about. It is not at all clear that that's the case. But they certainly seem to be uh, insisting that that is the direction that this goes in. Again, it's hard for me to fathom how anyone can truly believe that. Um, and I think when so you know what, let's actually look at the agreement itself. Uh, so here we go. So here's the 20 points. There's the first five of them that you can see that Gaza will be de-radicalized. Um, whoops. That Gaza will be de-radicalized, that it will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. I mean, this is all, sort of boilerplate stuff and doesn't really mean much of anything. Um, Now, the third point is where things start to get interesting. So it says that both sides agree to the proposal that the war which is, of course, a misnomer. This is not a war, it's a genocide, that the war will immediately end. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed upon line to prepare for hostage release. During this time, all military operations, including aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended and battle lines will remain frozen until conditions are met for the complete staged withdrawal. It is very clear that Netanyahu does not agree with that. He made no mention of it in his remarks after Trump presented this plan, and it certainly does not seem like something that he would agree to. But even if he did, um, the next condition is that within 72 hours, all the hostages then get returned. So let's say for a moment, let's just say, imagine that Netanyahu agrees and stops the shooting, stops the bombing, stops all the violence, and within 72 hours, Israel gets back the remaining living hostages and the bodies of the hostages that who have died that are still in Gaza. There is an obvious question that if I'm not just Hamas, but any Palestinian would have to ask is, so then what stops Netanyahu from resuming uh, the onslaught? Now, of course, it's not quite that simple because if the moment he got the hostages back, he simply went right back in and went full bore on the genocide. Uh, Trump would not appreciate that, to say the least. It would just, it's not a question of the humanitarian aspect, but it would make him look stupid. And but it isn't hard to imagine a pretext um, for resuming the operations, gradually ramping them up, provoking something. All of these are things that Israel has done in the past, almost certainly would do again. Here we get to another piece of the pressure that is on Hamas. It says once all the hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7th, including all women and children detained in that context. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. I want us to look at this condition. We have heard for 2 years, and let's not minimize what it means. We have heard nothing but uh, uh, the crocodile tears that Israeli leaders have cried over the hostages, the hostages, the hostages, while the people who really care about the hostages have been out in the street protesting the Israeli government for not even trying to get the hostages back. But when we talk about the hostages, we only talk about the Israeli hostages who are in Gaza, and this should not be minimized. Okay, the taking of hostages is a war crime. Unequivocally, this was a crime. This was unacceptable. And incidentally, hostages are unacceptable and against international law, whether they are civilian or military. You can capture prisoners of war, okay, but you cannot hold anyone, military or civilian, hostage under international law. They're two different things. And so taking hostages is against international law and it's wrong. Um, and it should not be tolerated. But we've heard a lot about the 230, I believe, hostages that were taken on October 7th. And we should hear about that. That's a real issue. But what about all these hostages that are being held in Israel? These 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7th, 2023, some of them may have had some involvement with the attack on October 7th, or some of them may have been, in fact, what you would call in this circumstance, perhaps prisoners of war in the sense that they had attacked Israeli soldiers and were not killed but were captured. Although that is not standard operating procedure for the Israeli military. It's not common. They usually don't take the hostages, don't take the prisoners. But some of them may be, but mostly these are people who have been rounded up by Israel, brought into Israeli prisons, held without trial, without charge, without access to legal representation, that's being held hostage. That's the same thing. And in many cases, those people who have been released at times, at various times over the past 2 years, and we've seen their condition looks distressingly similar to those that we've seen in videos of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. Except the difference is that Israel is not under a siege. Israel has plenty of food. Israel has no reason to starve those people. Israel has no excuse for torturing those people. Israel has no excuse for those people coming out having lost 40, 50 pounds. Okay. I'm not saying it's acceptable when it's happening to Israeli hostages in Gaza either, but let's be honest. Whatever has happened to those Israeli hostages, as horrific as it may be, part of it is because of Israel's indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza, which has put those hostages at risk, which we know has killed some of the hostages. And because of Israel's tactics that cut off food, if you cut off food to all of Gaza, that includes the hostages being held there. So, but we don't hear about these Palestinian hostages. And I think we need to really think about that. And when we're looking at this, uh, when we're looking at this condition, that should remind us that the taking of hostages is wrong no matter who does it. The taking of hostages is unacceptable no matter who does it. And Israel has done it at a much larger scale, as they do everything that they accuse Hamas of, sometimes correctly, but everything they do accuse them of, Israel itself has done on a much larger scale. And we need to deal with this reality. And this is why we need a system of justice. But to go back to the point here, this many people being released, the life sentence prisoners, those are fighters. Those are probably people who are convicted of terrorism or murder. So those are going to be fighters. Those are people who are going to be released as heroes. And rightly or wrongly, that's the way they will come home. So those people are important. But we're talking about, what are we talking? We're talking about probably more than 2,000 Palestinian prisoners being freed. And that was a big reason. That was a huge part. Some believe the biggest part of the motivation for the October 7th attack in the first place. So this is a big incentive for Hamas to agree, and it's a big pressure. It's hard for them to say no to this. So then we see that we move to the idea that once the hostages are returned, whoops, boy, that is a problem. Just leave it here, maybe. That once the hostages are returned, Hamas members who can agree to peaceful coexistence. This is bullshit. There's no way that Israel is allowing any Hamas members to stay in Gaza and to stay free. They might agree to put them in prison instead of shooting them down. They might agree to that. But more important, the next condition says that aid will immediately go into the Gaza Strip once this agreement is accepted. And again, I'm going to come back to what we said before. The stipulation itself here talks about, rehabilitating infrastructure, water, electricity, sewer, rehabilitating hospitals and bakeries, and entry of necessary equipment to remove rubble and open roads. So let's not kid ourselves that humanitarian aid is suddenly going to start flowing as soon as Hamas agrees. This is going to take a very long time before they can even set up the infrastructure to properly distribute aid in Gaza. It's not going to be an easy process. The destruction is unimaginable there. Okay. They're probably not going to allow. Oh, well, I would go beyond probably, but and actually say there's a certainty they're not going to allow UNRWA to do this. And yes, they're saying UN agencies and the Red Crescent can do it, and that's helpful to some extent. But UNRWA is the one organization that can really do this at scale and knows how to at least try to overcome some of these obstacles. I think the other concern here is that That the condition is that whoever is distributing this aid is not associated with either party. And I think that's some telling language, because either party means Israel or the Palestinians. It doesn't mean the United States. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is that foundation that has been set up to ostensibly give aid to Palestinians, but is actually gunning them down, that's American. That won't stop. And I think we can also rest assured that that will be that the GHF will be a key driver, not just a driver, not just one among many organizations, but a key driver of this entire system. And if that doesn't give you chills, then you haven't been paying attention. Now we talk about this board of peace that Donald Trump is going to chair. And the only other person that is mentioned as being a potential member is Tony Blair. So this is what, we're looking at Trump and Blair as being, and let's be honest, Blair doesn't really have much of a job these days. He can devote a lot more of his time to this than Trump can, and more than likely it is Blair who will be the really active director or chairman of the board or whatever you want to call it in this process. And it's responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. So that's very broad. Basically, that means it's responsible for everything that's going on. It's basically the de facto government in Gaza. So we're talking about a de facto government led by Tony Blair, man not well regarded in the Arab world. And its head of state, if you will, is Donald Trump. I can't really see too many Palestinians feeling comfortable with this. And this is basically, it says here that this body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program as outlined in various proposals, including President Trump's peace plan in 2020 and the Saudi-French proposal, and can securely and effectively take back control of Gaza. And I want us to pause on this for a moment, too, because all of this comes back to this idea of Palestinian statehood, which was just recognized by so many people, and which Trump, of course, blasted all of those countries for recognizing. When Israel was formed in 1948, there was no outside tribunal, if you will, that decided whether the Jews, the Zionist movement, or I should say the Zionist movement, deserved a state, or if it had, or when it built that state, who could be part of it, what form it should take. Why should the Palestinians have to earn a state? Why should they have to perform these reforms to create a state? Now, we know why. Why is the realities of power? The realities of power are that Israel has the power, the Palestinians don't. And so Israel is going to say, well, if they don't do X, Y, and Z, we're not going to permit the state because we have the power to stop it. Not the right, but the power. I mean, Israel might say it has the right, but the truth is, what they have is the power. And this is, of course, where the people come in and try to stand up for the rights of the Palestinians. But I want to also add in the pragmatic note. Look, you can construct a state that will oppress the Palestinians, that will be run by Palestinians who will oppress the Palestinians. We've seen it in the Palestinian Authority since it was formed 30 years ago. And you can have this state be beholden to Israel, to the United States, to the rest of the Arab dictatorships, etc. But if you think that's going to make peace, if you think that's going to solve the problem, I think you're desperately mistaken. And pathetically mistaken, and it's going to lead to just the conflict taking a different form. And I think we've had enough of that, haven't we? Haven't we had enough of all of this taking a different form? If you continue to oppress the Palestinians and treat them as less than human, as less than capable, as less than deserving of the same rights that we all have, this problem is not going to go away. It's not going to stop. And this board of peace is just the latest manifestation of that issue. This has to be resolved. And I'm talking about even, I believe that right now we need to end the genocide. That needs to be the first thing. But this entire process has happened completely without the Palestinians. Completely without. I mean, the basically the United States talked to Arab states and they talked to Israel and they talked among themselves and they came up with a plan and they said to Hamas, here, take it or leave it. They didn't even involve the Palestinian Authority. I mean, not that I think that would have necessarily made things better, but they didn't even pay that much lip service to it. So, how does anyone expect that to succeed? Of course, this board is going to do a Trump economic plan and make an economic zone. These are plans and ideas that have been explored before. If you remember, those of us who are of my generation or older will remember Israel and Jordan. Shimon Peres was a big force in trying to get this sort of Middle East free zone that had Israel and Jordan at the center of it. And this was all supposed to be part of building the Palestinian Authority up in the West Bank and moving towards Palestinian, at least autonomy or a Palestinian state, et cetera. None of this stuff ever works. And this isn't going to either. This is even more poorly thought out than that stuff was. But, they do say here that no one will be forced to leave Gaza. And again, I mean, Israel would contend that they're not forcing anyone to leave Gaza. In fact, this was Netanyahu's big sort of talking point the last time he was in at the White House. He said, that no, what we want to give the Palestinians is not expulsion. We want to give them freedom of choice. You can live in this completely destroyed area under permanent siege and permanent bombardment and starvation and no hope for the future, or you can go somewhere else. Freedom of choice. We're not forcing. You can stay. I mean, come on. Who are we kidding here? Um, this is seriously selling the Brooklyn Bridge stuff. Um, We move again now to Hamas and other factions agreed to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. First of all, this is nonsense. It's unenforceable. Um, Hamas could disband. It could go away. The idea of Hamas will manifest in some other party. It could be even one that doesn't necessarily have an armed wing, isn't necessarily an armed group that carries out any sort of active, violent resistance. But they're going to form a political party of some kind. People who have these beliefs will form a group of some kind. And, and that's just a very extreme example. The truth of the matter is that there could be no more Hamas, there could be no more Islamic Jihad, there'll be a new group. There will be resistance where there is occupation, where there is oppression, where there is siege, where there is the denial of basic rights and turning people and treating people as if they are subhuman. There will be resistance, and it will not always be pretty. It will not always take the form of sit-ins and strikes. It will take the form of violence. It will take the form of violence to civilians. It has always done so in every similar situation in history. There is no way around that. So this notion that you can also dictate, can you imagine the outrage in 1949 if the British had said, we will not abandon our mandate in Palestine and allow a Jewish state to arise if Beirut is going to be in any way part of the Israeli government. Might have been a good thing as it turns out, but um, the idea would have been laughable. Nobody would have said that. It isn't feasible to do, and it isn't right to do. Okay, you uh, cannot have one country dictate who can be involved in another. I mean, if there is a party If there is a group of people that is a danger to the entire world, that you just can't have them in control of their country, I'd say the first one on that list is the Republican Party. You're talking about a party whose leader, Donald Trump, just went to the United Nations and said global warming is a hoax. You're talking about a country that just goes out and bombs little boats in the ocean and then just claims that they were carrying drugs with no proof, no evidence. You're talking about a country that has been, forget Trump, you know, that has been at the forefront of every kind of hatred that known to humanity. You're talking about a party that has literally been described by some of the great intellectuals of our time as a death cult. But nobody would dare say that the United States can't have the Republican Party involved in this government. We wouldn't say it. We would say get a real decent alternative that the Democrats are not, and vote them out. That's not how it's going to work for the Palestinians. And that is not going to be acceptable. Again, right now, there may be lots of Palestinians in Gaza who would say, yes, yes, whatever, you know. But later on down the road, that breeds resentment. Of course it does, because you're treating people like, first of all, you're treating people like they don't know what they're doing, like they cannot handle their own affairs, as if we are so capable of making those kinds of judgments because we've done so well in our own countries. Um, but on top of that, it's simply you're denying people their rights, and people will fight back. They always have, and they always will. Now we get into this entire, this international stabilization force, which seems to have taken a lot of these Muslim and Arab states by storm. They seem to love it. Indonesia couldn't wait to pledge 20,000 troops to this force. Um, I don't see this ending very well either, and I don't see this lasting. I don't see an international Arab and Muslim force in Gaza being greeted very warmly and being the solution to these problems. I think you're going to also have quite a few of these soldiers not real happy about the things they're being asked to do, and you'll have problems then with that. The idea, as the Trump plan makes clear in its next point, is that Israel does not occupy or annex Gaza. The Israel Defense Force will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, with the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. You want to implement, I want us to make this clear that Trump is suggesting that a plan be implemented within 3 days with those standards. There's no timeline. We don't have this timeline. We don't have milestones and standards and timeframes. We don't have any of it. Oh, we'll figure it out as we go along. How do you think that's going to end? It's going to end well. Um, And Netanyahu knows this. One of the reasons that Netanyahu would agree to this kind of a thing, he's not going to feel comfortable with 20,000 Indonesian troops and a handful of Emiratis and a handful of Turks being in there trying to disarm Hamas. He's not going to be satisfied with that. I mean, he's going to insist that Israel finish the job, as it were, which comes back to killing all the people in Gaza. That is the job in Netanyahu's eyes, and it can't. The fact that it's happening slowly suits him very well, because the longer it takes, the longer he puts off his legal problems. The longer he has a country and politicians who aren't going to bring down his government. So, but it is inconceivable that Israel, and it's not just Netanyahu, it's not even just Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's the opposition. It's Naftali Bennett. It's Avigdor Lieberman. It's Benny Gantz. None of these people look at Gaza and say, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll let them handle it. We'll let them protect our borders." Israel has never been willing to let others protect their borders. That's what Israeli history is all about. That's what Israeli strategy has always been about. So this idea that the IDF, as it says here, will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority. I, I mean, the idea. First of all, there's no agreement. There's nothing to agree to. There isn't. There are no details here. This is completely hollow. So, how do we really think that Netanyahu sincerely is going to pursue such conditions in good faith? And even if he did, which is ridiculous, but even if he did, you think he could sell that to his cabinet? Really? Because if you think that, you haven't been paying much attention to Israel. You haven't been paying much attention to how Israel makes its decisions. The idea that Israeli leaders, I don't care, it doesn't have to be Netanyahu. They can be from labor. They can be from other parties that have been in existence in the past, the Democrats, as they call themselves now. They could have been from labor. They could have been from Kadima. They could have been from whoever you want to talk about in Israeli history. No Israeli leader is going to say, yeah, sure, we'll have other people defend our borders. It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. It is an absurdity. It goes against the very essence of Israeli thinking. So this is just an absurdity. There's no way Netanyahu will allow that to happen. And as long as Israeli soldiers are continuing to be the occupying force in Gaza, they're going to be resisted. And as long as they're resisted, they're going to be killing Palestinians. So this is all just, you know, more examples of why this is just completely silly. It is a smoke and mirrors campaign for Trump to be able to say that he at least tried, or maybe in some way he'll twist it into having actually brought peace to the Middle East. But the substance just isn't there. And as we see, the next condition is in the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above, including the scaled up aid operation, will proceed in the terror free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. Well, that's the condition that we have now, supposedly. Um, there's nothing to that whatsoever. Basically, they're saying they're going to go back to business as usual. Um, they're going to have the World Food the World Food Program, or and through the GHF give out dribs and drabs of aid in certain areas and not in others, where the IDF will be operating, and in those areas Palestinians are going to be slaughtered, and that's where the Palestinians are. So the rest of it is, just more of the same. Interfaith dialogue and et cetera. We're going to build toward a two-state solution. I mean, this is not a plan. This is nothing credible. This is all smoke and mirrors. And it's a cruel joke to play on people who have been suffering for 2 years. And I'm not just talking about the people in Gaza. Obviously, those are the people who have been suffering the most. And next come the people in the West Bank. I'm talking about their families all over the world, throughout the Arab world, throughout Europe, throughout the United States, who are seeing dozens, scores, hundreds of their family members killed and injured for 2 years without respite. And in the last couple of weeks, we've heard all this. Oh, we're so close to a deal. We're almost there. We have these Arab countries on board. Hamas, there's even been a few leaks to the media to say that Hamas was responding positively, which was not true, because Hamas never even got a proposal until today. So, those were just things that were, sort of leaked to the media that were just lies. But they're raising people's hopes that this could end, and it can't. This plan is not going to end it, even if Hamas agrees to it. which I don't think they will, but they might because the pressure on them to do so is unprecedented. You have all of these Arab and Muslim states lining up behind Trump. So if they're sincere, if those states are sincere, and some of them are ones that are important to Hamas, like Turkey, like Qatar, um, even Egypt. So it is a lot for Hamas to be able to say, no, I still suspect they will reject this. But if they don't, it will fall apart on its own. And again, it is Trump playing with people's very lives for his vanity project, and that is contemptible. It's Netanyahu playing with lives that he sees as completely worthless for his own selfish gain. And that's unfortunately what so much of this has been about from the beginning. So I leave it there. I hope this has given you some information to chew on. Um, I will post on at rethinkingforeignpolicy.org. I will post these 20 points so people can reference them whenever they want. So they won't be behind paywalls as they are at some of the news sites where I found it. And yeah, we will see how things progress. I do want to add an appeal to those of you who find this useful to please support this work. Um, this is my source of income, so if you can help me keep putting out this analysis, as well as doing some of the advocacy work here in Washington that I do in coalition with many other groups. It's very much appreciated. If you go to mitchellplitnick.substack.com, you can become a paid subscriber to Cutting Through, my newsletter, or you will see a link to donate to support this work. If you can't do that, please just like, share, and subscribe to these videos on YouTube or at Substack. If you subscribe at Substack, you'll also get all of my writing. And let's all hope that we can come together and I don't know, somehow find ways forward because things look very, very grim right now. Thank you.